Pat was crewing in Lancasters during World War II and saw lots of action. He's going to tell you all about it. He has not let Lancasters go because he is spending a lot of his spare time at the Bull Creek Aviation Museum, where he's the Lancaster expert. So if you go for a tour over the museum, Pat will be the man who'll give you first-class treatment. Pat, over to you.
I was born on the 24th of April 1924 in Melbourne, and my parents came over here when I was 2.5. When I was 5 years old, my father took me out to Maylands Aerodrome, and he'd organised a flight for me in a Clem Eagle monoplane. And that was the beginning of my life with flying. And the pilot was a chap named Stewart. Apparently only had one eye, and there were only 2 people in the world who were pilots at that stage with one eye because of the landing factor. And I had this half-hour ride in this monoplane down over the Perth waters where Riverside Drive is now, and it was something that really intrigued me. I just loved it. And I can remember as a small kid going out to Maylands Aerodrome whenever I could to see the planes, the Hawker Demons, the Bristol Bulldogs, and flower bombing and all that sort of thing, and it was great. So I was a very sick kid. I had pneumonia, 4 lots of pneumonia by the time I was 17, and I was only a frail kid. And what happened, I had a bad accident in 1941 in Easter, where I dented my skull in, and I went kept down in the countryside where it happened for about a week to see I was all right. I went back home, and about 3 weeks later, I wake up about 5 o'clock in the morning coughing up a lot of blood. So I was carted off in an ambulance in the hospital, and I was spent 2 months in hospital with pneumonia, and then I got pleurisy in the other lung, and then I had to have a month's rest at home. I'd gone back to work in an office in Perth, and I was 17 years and 4 months, and I went home to my mother and father and said, I want to join aircrew, and that was before the Japs came in. And they said, no, you can't. I said, well, I'm going to nick off and join the AIF, and you won't be able to stop me. So I signed my papers for aircrew then. And I went and did the medical, I passed the medical, and I was accepted into aircrew at 17 years and 4 months. And there was no air training corps or anything like that then. And what happened was that I was then, went to night school with the senior boats, the 18s to 32s. Because everybody who went into aircrew in those days had to do their 9 months at night school. And I did all that, and I turned 18. As soon as I turned 18, they called me up, and I went straight in civilian clothes to Eastern States to Victor Harbour. And then I was assessed as being a young fella like you make good gunners. So they suggested I be straight air gunner or wireless air gunner, and that was what I was categorised at. And I passed the aircrew, went on to Ballarat, and I was quite good on the operation. But I wasn't very good at radio theory. And I always remember the sergeant in class, our ground staff sergeant in charge of our class, he said, Dwyer, you know 4/5 of 5/8 of sweet FA about radio theory, you see. And I thought, I didn't know that much. And what happened was the night before the exam, a good friend of mine in the hut I was in gave me his notes to read, and I read the notes and I passed the exam. So I became a wireless operator then, and rear gunner, and I was still 18. The first time home in uniform was an 18-year-old, and I was home for 2 weeks and then straight back to the Eastern States again, and I got selected to go to East Sale. It was the second course there in early 43, and I was going on to Hudson Bombers. There they put you into a crew. They said you were in so-and-so's crew. So there were 4 of the crew, a pilot, an observer, and 2 wireless air gunners. And the wireless air gunners would take turns of being on the radio with the guns. And that pilot was told, you know, we're in his crew, and he didn't want to know us. And it was only a month later where the crew were broken up. The pilots weren't quite good enough, and I was sent back to reserve squadron. And a whole heap of us went over to Port Adelaide onto a ship into Inco. And when we got there, we went to Brighton. It was very good. And the first training I did was up in Milliman, Cumberland on Ansons. I did try to get onto low-level flying, but they said no, Bomber Command or Coastal Command. I wanted Bomber Command, and I was told ask for Lancaster, so that's what I did. I don't think it made any difference, but I got them. So after doing this advanced flying unit up in Milliman, Cumberland. We learned all about the Marconi equipment and a certain amount of radar. And then I was posted to a station at Peplow in Shropshire. And this was on Wellington bombers. And there you were to meet your crew. And this morning I arrived at the station. I went to the sergeant's mess to get a bit of food because I hadn't had any breakfast. And I was the only one in the sergeant's mess. And in came 3 POMs, a pilot, a navigator, and a bomb aimer. This pilot came up to me and said, "Would you like to be in my crew?" And I said, "Yes, I'd love to." And that relationship is still there today. He is alive, he's 85 now, and he's been a terrific guy. He was an orphan at the age of 4, left school at the age of 13, had a very tough upbringing, tried to get into aircrew in 1939 as an 18-year-old, was rejected, put into ground staff, and then after 2 years of study, educationally, he got into aircrew, or 3 years it was in 1942 he got in to become a pilot. So when he came and invited me to be in his crew, it was a different proposition than the Australian setup. I thought that the POMs know something there. You're not being put into a crew that doesn't want you, you're put into a crew that wants you. And this relationship is still going on. Now we flew on Wellingtons, and the first flight my pilot did was with an instructor and another pilot. They took off. We watched the plane charge down the runway, my crew, and this plane, Wellington, took off. Up in the air it went, wheels up, and then one motor went. So then he pointed to the deck again and came down and had a very nasty landing, which wrecked the plane quite a bit. But they got away with a bad shaking and a couple of days in hospital. So we then went on flying into Wellingtons, and we had the instructors, went through dual, control, solo. I remember we were taking off one day and we got up to about 90 miles an hour at the end of the runway, and a strong crosswind, and what happened was the port engine chopped out. We only had one engine just to take off, and we went into a series of ground loops all over the place, just about wiped out the main building, the administration building on the station, and then we pulled the undercarriage up to stop us, and it didn't stop. The undercarriage didn't come up, the old siren was going, that was all. The rest of it wasn't working. So we then went on to running backwards, and because the Wellingtons burnt like crazy, you know, to be in them. I'd seen too many people being cooked in them, and I just couldn't get out of there quick enough. I was first out of the plane. It was like, when we were going around, it was like being in a car with darkened windows. You're just whizzing all over the place, and you're getting swung here, there, and everything. So we got out, and I was first out of the plane, and then the other members of the crew got out, and the commanding officer in Australia, by the name of Wing Commander Dugan, he was the CEO of that squadron. When my pilot got out, he went crook at him for stuffing up a good plane. And I thought, there's no bloody good planes on OTUs. They're on ops, and they've got bad ones on ops as well. So, and so we went on with our flying. It was only about 3 weeks later when we were taking off. Oh, that was when we took off that one. And we got through. We had to do night flying, everything like that. Went on a trip to France, and dropping leaflets over there, propaganda stuff. And the pilot who was with my pilot in that first takeoff and crash, he was on his second tour. He'd done a tour as an observer on bombers, and he was doing now as a pilot on them. And he and his crew went out on the night, dropping leaflets near Paris, and they got shot down by a night fighter, all killed. So that was the way it sort of went. We went on to Halifaxes then, and the Halifaxes at this place called Santoff in Yorkshire, which was the inline engine Halifax, the Mark 1s and 2s, and they had triangular fins, and they were not popular plane. They were a bit unsafe. The later Halifaxes, the Mark 1s, 3s and 5s were great. But this one, my pilot was sick, and I got this flight in one of these, and I had to fly with the station. He was the top pilot there, top instructor in these planes, and your crew went through and did your dual control and as solo with him, without him. And what happened was, in this flight, he climbed this plane up to 12,000 feet or thereabouts. It was daytime, and we're not on oxygen. And then he cut the 2 port motors, and he put the plane into a dive and went screaming down, good speed. And then he pulled the old nose up and kept climbing until the stall with 2 dead engines on the port side. And he let the plane drop, and he kept doing this for an hour, this flying, and I'd never been anything like it. It was marvellous. I just loved it. It was a sort of, and I'm up in the nose. There's no turret in the nose. I just had this bird's eye view of everything. It was terrific, and that gave me a good feeling about how good this pilot was. And then, so what happened then is the second hour, we had beat-ups across the English countryside. And we're right on the deck there, going across in Yorkshire it was, across into the sea, North Sea and so on. And that was marvellous as well. So, you know, that was a good start to it all. We picked up our engineer at the station, and he was a chap named Eric Martindale. And Marty was 19 years old. And when we met him, he'd just come back to the station. He'd been the sole survivor of a Halifax crash. And he was telling me about it. They were coming into land, and this plane dropped a wing. And it hit the runway, and the plane did a series of cartwheels. And Marty said there was all this crashing and banging. He said, suddenly it was all quiet. He said, my first thought was, I'm not dead. But what happened was that the other 5 people in the plane were dead. And Marty went home and had his survivors leave and everything like that, and came back. And my pilot selected him because he came from Cumberland, where my navigator came from. My other crew members were 2 Cockneys, and my bombman was a Cambridge University student, lived in West London, and he was a member of the Communist Party at that time, Boris, and he was a bit of a character, except I can tell you now he's no longer a communist. He chucked that away long ago, and he's earned awards for his services in England. But Boris was a bit of a character, and he was a fun bloke to be with and everything like that. As I say, I didn't agree with his politics, but we got on well together, and as a crew it was quite good, really. Les was terrific. And we got on from there, we went on from the Halifaxes, we went on, I did about 4 or 5 trips over, what they send you over to England, the European coastline was, you sent a few Halifaxes over there, and they'd act as for a diversionary raid. What you do when your planes flew over, you'd be picked up by the radar in Germany, and they would send the fighters out to get you. They'd think there was going to be a raid on, you see. And in the meantime, when you're over there and dragging the fighters up that way, the main force would go down south of England, across the French coast, over France and that would cut down the problems that they might have with fighters to a limited degree anyway. So that was, I did about 4 or 5 of those trips. These sort of trips didn't count as part of your ops at all, they were just training exercises. And and then we had from there we were posted to a station called Wickenby. It was 626 Squadron there, and it was a wartime squadron station there, and my squadron was formed in November 42 there. No, 43, November 43 it was. And when you went there, I didn't know, but we found out since, your crew was assessed short-term or long-term, and so whatever you've got assessed, so you've got the planes and crew to go with it. My crew was given 2 weeks to live, and we had, when I was told about this, I said to the bloke who told me, who'd been one of the station leaders, section leaders, he said to me, he said, Pat, did you know that when you went to 626 Squadron, your crew was assessed short-term or long-term? And I didn't, and I just said, did you have bets on it, you see? And he said, no, nothing like that. And I said, I know, but the bloody aircraft, because you wouldn't give a good aircraft to a crew you assess short-term, otherwise you could stuff up your predictions, you see? And he said, oh, no, they wouldn't do that, would they? And that was what it was. We got crappy aircraft, and the ground staff there on a wartime station, the good ground crew went straight to the permanent stations where all the facilities, the peacetime stations were good. Then you went on to a wartime station, and things weren't so good. The servicing of my ground crew and things like that wouldn't do good. They made a terrible mistake. Obviously we did get the worst crew because it said short-term ground crew. And they made terrible mistakes. We had things like, I remember taking off on one trip, and we went charging down this runway, 2,000-yard runway. We're the only plane taking off at that distance, the full length of the runway. The others were planes were going into cross runway. We're going to Essen was the target. And once we're charging down the runway, all the other planes took off. And I remember my pilot having the brakes on this night and revving the thing up like crazy. The plane was jumping up and down on the spot. It couldn't move one way or the other. And when we got the green orders lamp to go, we were charging down this runway. And just as we got to the end of the runway, Les called out on the intercom, I can't get enough speed. And when you take off the Lancaster bomber, and you're going off the bitumen surface into dirt and just open fields, it was a bit nasty. And all he could do was pull back on the stick on this plane, and we went up in the air. We were only doing 95 knots instead of 115, and that was the problem, lack of weight or lack of power and that sort of thing. And what happened was the plane came down in the fields after we took off, and that, at the stage, you can't put the brakes on, you'll snap the undercarriage off if the undercarriage is not already snapped off by hitting the ground again and that soft stuff. And we did this 6 bounces in the plane before we stayed up in the air. And it was a bit frightening, I tell you. When by the time we got to Lincoln was about 8 miles away, we were only up to 500 feet. And I remember the engineer and the pilot chatting on the intercom about that. And we got back on that plane, we got back to base. We got there and got back all right. We landed safely. We found out afterwards the ground crew had made a mistake. The plane had been loaded for a trip to East Germany where it had full fuel tanks and less bombs. And what to do to go into Essen, you had to have 4 bombs, full load of bombs and less petrol. 500 gallons you had to take out. The ground crew forgot to take the 500 gallons of fuel out. You know, if you're dead, they don't have any inquiries on that. When you went into your section on Bomb Command on where I was, they had a blackboard with the names of the people on the blackboard in chalk. And it was never in alphabetical order, because when you got the chop, they just rubbed your name off and how many off you were, and then they would put the, they would just, when the new person came in to replace the one that gone off, that name would go in the place of the other one. So it was nothing in alphabetical order, it was as simple as all that. We just had to put up with that, and that was what went on. So there's no crying around the station or anything like that. You didn't want to cry, it was bad enough having the frights within yourself without letting your crew know that you're scared. And that was it. So we had our second trip. First trip was a piece of cake. It was so easy, and I thought I'd volunteer for 2 tours, you see. And the second trip we went on, we're going to a place called Emmerich in the Ruhr Valley, and we're flying at 10,000 feet in daylight. And I was looking out of the astrodome behind us, and this plane got hit by flak. And I just saw it keel straight over, straight down, nose down. I watched it going down, and it just never pulled out of that vertical dive, and I didn't see anybody get out of it, so I presume they all got the chop. And what happened was we went, opened our bomb bay doors to be in the target, and we got a direct hit by a shell with our bombs on, bomb bay doors open, and the blast of the plane, it was like getting hit by a rocket. The plane got shoved straight up, just flying horizontally, and I could feel my legs just being pushed through my backside from the force below. Your body wasn't going as fast as your legs wanted to go. And it was pretty, a bit scary sort of thing. And we dropped our bombs and we got back. The plane had been hit from nose to tail, and the bomb bay doors were open. And the flak holes had gone through the inside of the bomb bay doors instead of coming through from the outside inside. So we got lucky there. The next trip we were going to a place called Duisburg, and we're flying along at 20,000 feet there, and we're going through this clear skies, and suddenly we were on our own, no other planes just close to us, and suddenly a barrage of flak came up, and about 25 shells burst in a circle right around us, and we were in the middle of this, and you could smell the cordite inside the plane through your oxygen mask, and we didn't get hit. But about 2 minutes later, I'm looking forward, and there's a Lancaster in front of us, a few hundred feet above it, and it got hit by flak, and it blew up. And all you saw was an orange and yellow ball of flame, and it was so frightening. I never said a word about it, nobody else said a word about it, they saw it. But it was so demoralising to see this plane completely disintegrate, nothing there. And what happened was, after that, we flew through the blood of the crew that splattered the pilot's windscreen. And nothing was said about that, they just shut up about it, and we'll find out afterwards. But once again, it was a bit scary, was that. So then the next trip we were going to a place called Wilhelmshaven. We're flying at night time at 14,000 feet over the North Sea. And as we're cruising along in cloud, we flew into a Q-nim cloud in the dark. And that threw us into a spin with a full bomb load on. So we're spinning down out of control. The pilot's got his feet on the instrument panel and trying to pull the stick back, and he couldn't do it. And he gave us the order to bail out if you want to. And I didn't hear if you want to, I just heard the bailout bit, because I got the message then, you see, and And I thought, well, what's the use of bailing out here? You've got 3 minutes to live when you land in the North Sea. You're going to freeze to death anyway. So I just accepted that was the end of the penny section, and I was gone. And I didn't have time to be frightened. You just didn't have the time to be frightened then, that was it. But what happened, this engineer that we survived the crash with his crew on the Halifaxes, Marty got behind the pilot and reached over Les's shoulders with his arms, and he got his hands on the control column, and the 4 hands and the 2 feet managed to pull the nose up out of this plane. We got up and out of the spin, and I thought we won our way. And when people spoke on in that plane, on the intercom after that, the joy in their voices was so obvious. It was so happy that we're still there, and it was quite funny to, be. I always remember, I've never forgotten the voices. The sound of their voice, they all sounded different. And so we got through and we got back to that raid, and that was that one there. We had, that was one that I called Stuttgart, was an extra, and we're going there, and when we got in the plane, where I sat near the main spar, and I had the wing, so I had a window on the right-hand side, the port side, and the right side, and what happened was, I looked out this window when I went to sit down in my seat, and there was petrol dripping off the leading edge of the plane. And I called out to the pilot, Les, you better get the ground staff, there's petrol leaking off the edge of the plane there, or wing, starboard wing. And he called the ground staff bloke up, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and the ground staff bloke came out, and he said, oh no, nothing to worry about. He said, we just don't fill the tanks, that's all. That's just too much fuel and fuel, that's why it's dripping. So we accepted that and went on our way. And when we got to the target, we got the Les said, or the engineer said to Les, we're down on fuel on the starboard wing. We've got a problem. So going back, we talked about a 2-engine switch of the tanks, or 4-engine. They were worried about cutting them out altogether. And so we had to keep flying as we were with the starboard wing up a bit, and flying it manually back to base. And then when we got back there, I got the job of firing a red berry cartridge to make emergency landing. And we got in there and they checked the tanks to see what was in there. There was 40 gallons in the port wing and 14 gallons in the starboard wing. And in a Lancaster bomber that uses up 200 gallons an hour, 14 gallons wasn't going to go too far. And you couldn't put your port wing down in case that petrol went away from the engines, and that was so that was the way that was that happened there. So we got out of that one. Another one we had. I'll just try to think some of these trips we had. Always a trip we went to Cologne, and when we went there, this particular was daylight, 20,000 feet were top height, and what happened was as we got into the target area, ready to drop bombs. A 4,000-pound bomb missed our starboard wingtip by about 5 feet. And that's all. I didn't have time to look up and see what else was coming. I just yelled hard port on the intercom. The pilot dropped the wing down and then straightened out. And when he straightened out, I looked up and there was another load of bombs coming straight down on us. And I yelled, we're going to get hit, you see. And the next minute there was all this flooding through the plane as we got hit by incendiary bombs. There was 3 through the port wing, 3 through the starboard, and 1 through the tail. And the 4,000-pound cookie just missed the trailing edge of our port wing. So the plane was, we were frightened we were going to blow up in mid-air. We got our parachutes on and kept going, and all the other planes around us couldn't get away quick enough from us because I thought we were going to blow up in mid-air. So with all this fuel burning, or possibly burning, the rear gunner was being soaked in petrol. It was like the back of a station wagon with the lid open, and the back rear turret, it was sucking the petrol in there. And so he got soaked as well. And so what happened then, we had to get ourselves flying and work out how to get back to England with all this loss of fuel. And so what happened was that the engineer, the navigator and the pilot were all in on the deal. And when we're flying back, the Germans picked us up with all this fuel pouring out, and they had pot shots as it was the flak. And the flak missed us, the height was spot on, but they were about a second out. The shell just burst behind us. We got away with it. And then we got back to England, made a landing with that plane, and it was good. The next trip we're going on was a place called Eichel. And when we were going to take off on that raid, the 2 inner engines, we're taxiing around to take off, and the 2 inner engines dropped revs, and it was a bit dicey with weighing 30 tonnes with two of your engines not firing properly, holding the revs, taking off, you're going to crash somewhere, you don't know where. And so what happened was that we pulled into the spot, the main runway, into a spot there and sat in the plane while all the other planes went off. You had radio silence, you couldn't communicate out of the plane with anybody. And about a quarter of an hour after everybody went, the commanding officer came out in his car, this wing commander, RAF guy, and he got out of the car and he came up underneath our plane, we're all sitting in there, and he called out to my pilot, Les Landals, he said, "Landals, what's going on here?" And Les said, "We've cleared the plane, US sir, the two inner engines are dropping revs." He said, "Well, start them up," he says, "you're on your way." And we had to start the engines up and hope that we didn't, if we're taking off like that, you lose the power of the engines when you're taking off weighing 30 tonnes. You could finish up in a schoolyard, a hospital, a city, or anywhere. And we were ordered off to go in this plane, and we were, you know, this bloke was being bloody tough, this officer. And what happened was that we got off, and we got to this target, and there was nobody else there. And I thought to myself, what the bloody hell are we doing here, you see? Like got a lot of cloud around, and I go to call over the intercom, better live cows and dead heroes, you see. And all my pommy crew said, yeah. And the pilot says, "Where do we drop?" And they said, "We'll drop them here." So we let the bombs go, we couldn't take a photo or anything like that. And we headed back, and when we got back to Wickenby, we had to come in on the south side, we had to fly over these fields, then we had the main road to Rugby, which we had to fly over, and then on the other side of this Rugby road was our runway. And what happened there was that we got to the, coming in, 2850 red, full flap on wheels down, flying across these fields, and before we got to the road, the two engines lost power. We came down in the fields. And there was a big concrete drainage pipe, we smashed that, and then there were fences flying everywhere, and then we hit the main road. And we bounced up and flying crabwise over this road, very low, and there was I've got a lady I've got to write to. She was in the car, in a farm vehicle with her mother and father. She was 5 years old at the time. And the shadow of our plane came over the top of them. They thought they were going to get wiped out by us. And we didn't, so she's still alive. And so we managed to get onto the runway and landed safely there. And they filled it, when they filled in their reports for this raid, they left out the information about us being sent off, you know, with cook engines and things like that. They didn't cover, they covered themselves and protect themselves. So what happened about that one was, the next trip they given themselves a hell of a fright. They gave us a plane that was only 3 weeks old to go to a place called Dortmund. And we went in this plane where everything was right, with terrific plane, best plane we'd flown in. And what happened was we then got to Dortmund at 18,000 feet this night, and we opened the old Bombay doors over the target, let the bombs go. And what happened was, everything went except a 1,000-pound bomb. It was alive, but it didn't drop. So over Germany, we had the Bombay doors open, trying to shake this thing off, it wouldn't go. Over France, we closed the Bombay doors. Over the North Sea, we had this business of Bombay doors open, trying to bounce the plane around, trying to shake the bomb off, wouldn't go off, and all this sort of thing. And so what happened was, when we were flying over there, one of the crews had crashed there, and the pilot and engineer had been killed, the rest of the crew were all knocked around. They were out of the hut I was in. There were about 20 people in the hut, and they sort of got themselves all knocked around. So we touched down on this runway. It was a good landing, and as we touched down, moved down, this bomb fell off the hook, this 1,000-pounder. And what it did was the noise of this thing rolling around the Bombay doors, we called up an emergency. And they ordered us to go to the end of the 2,000-yard runway into a dispersal point and get out of the plane. We got down there, and when we got out of the plane, there was this bomb, was hanging nose down, it forced the Bombay doors open, and it was just being wedged about, only had about a quarter or a third of the bomb to go before it was all gone. And if that had hit the runway, it would have blown us up and killed us. And so that was a bit of a nasty shake-up. And next morning we're having breakfast for 5 of my crew in the sergeant's mess, having some breakfast. And what happened was that this crew, pommy crew, whose plane it was, came in, moaning at us for stuffing up their good plane, you see. We thought that was rather funny. We didn't give 2 hoots about them, because I flew with 6 bombs anyway. So, and so what happened was, that crew, about 3 weeks later, went out on a raid, and in very bad weather. You flew in terrible weather in England. you had smogs and fogs and everything like that, but the cumulum clouds, the thermal stuff around was very violent, very nasty, and things were pretty, and you had to get down pretty low to see where you were at times. And the lack of lighting around the place made it pretty hard as well. So what happened was that we, this next trip we went, this crew who come in moaning their heads off about us stuffing up the good plane, they went out on this raid in this plane in this bad weather. And when they got over near the German coastline, or the coastline of Europe, to go into Germany, the raid was cancelled because of the weather. They started coming back. Now they should have dropped their cookie, but they had the rest of the bombs on. And there'd be about 11,000 pounds of bombs they would still have there. And they lost their starboard inner engine as well, we know that much. And when they came back to the squadron to land, and they got the 2850 revs, full flap and wheels down, coming in, they got an order to do an overshoot because the weather was too lousy to land at our drome. When they went to do the overshoot, they dropped this wing, starboard wing, and went straight into our bomb dump and blew themselves to smithereens. They found a little bit of the foot of the lit-up gun, and that's what they found. And they had the 3 of the ground staff crew, RAF guys, ground staff guys, 3 of them got killed in that incident as well. So that was the sort of thing that went on over there. And they're just pretty ruthless and tough. And in the huts, I suppose I'll just explain a bit about there. There are 20 people in a hut. And, you know, no crying when people died or anything like that. There was none of that, no sadness. You just say, oh, they got the chop. And you were sort of happy in a way because somebody had to go off and it wasn't you, you were all right. And that was the feeling. But and so that was the way it was there. And I remember in my hut there was a crew of 2 Canadians, an American, Englishman and Scotsman. There were 5 of this crew. They had a New Zealand pilot and he and the navigator were officers. This night they're going out on a raid, and I was in charge of this hut because I was a warrant officer. And what happened this night, Gordon Keeble, the English wireless operator, came to me and said, Pat, can I borrow your flying socks tonight? And I had these flying socks given by the Australian Comforts Fund, and you put them on and over the top of your flying boots and curled them down over the sides, and you looked the part. And he was going, okay, took my socks that night. And when they didn't come back, I thought, you know, a bit of trouble here. And I knew the service police would be in pretty soon to get all this possession. So I hopped into the kit bags of the 2 Canadians and an American and pitched all their chocolates and cakes out of the kit bags, see? And so the service police wouldn't be able to eat that food then. They wouldn't send it back to America and Canada. They would eat it all themselves. So what happened then was we had a good feed the next day, and that was it. It wasn't until 1991 I got a letter from the historian of our Squadron Association who advised me that crew had gone in off the Dutch coast just out from Rotterdam, and only one body was found, and it was Gordon Keeble, the bloke who was wearing my socks. And he's buried in a cemetery just outside Rotterdam. In the 1980 I was in Rotterdam, and if I'd known his grave was there, I would have gone to see it, because he was a terrifically nice person, and that's what you found sad about the good guys who sort of did die, you know. It was tough life, and that was it.
You mentioned cookies several times. What's a cookie?
4,000 pound bomb. Yes, it's got a spade underneath the Lancaster. That was your big bomb that you carried on the normal trips. When you're on the special duties dropping on the submarine pens and that, they had the big stuff there on the big ships and things like that. But the cookies we carried, 4,000 pounds. We carried a maximum load of about 15,000, 16,000 pounds, I suppose it was, 15,000, I think. And that was a normal load. But when you went to East Germany, I made trips over to Eastern Europe, and you've got a 10-hour flight, and you don't have that. Another trip I just mentioned too, I just thought about, was we went to Kassel one night, and that was an 8-hour trip. And when we were going there, we lost one port motor it was 4 hours each way, and we were about 3 hours out from England, and we lost one port outer motor. And so we're on 3, and then we lost the port inner. So we're still going to target, and to keep up with the rest of the bombers to go there, my pilot had to put in a slow dive going downhill, got more speed out of it. And when we got over the target there, we're down to 13,000 feet and everybody else about 20,000. Last time I was over in England, my mum and pilot were chatting about this, and they were having a laugh about the fact that all the flak was going straight past us, you see, it going out for these people. And I said, that was all right. I said, but if a night fighter had got us, we would have been on strike trying to get away with it. And my pilot had to fly that plane manually all the way, and that was at night time. Now we'd get up about 7 o'clock in the morning. You wouldn't take off till about 8 o'clock at night or something like that. And a trip like that, you wouldn't get back till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And so he had to fly that plane manually all the way back. And it was pretty hard work doing it, because the old drag of the plane, of course, was tied up with the lack of engines. But we got back safely, and we landed safely. And Les was a bloody good pilot. Another story I can tell you about our hut too. There was Paddy Owen in my hut, and he was in a crew where they lost the 2 gunners in the crew when they were shot down over the French coast. And when they bailed out, the crew bailed out, and the 2 gunners were standing down the back with their parachutes on and everything like that, 2 English crewmen, and there was some Australians in this crew. And when the wireless operator was getting out, he said these blokes were standing there, and he thought they'd be out and get out. And the pilot thought they were all out, and he bailed out and saved. 5 of them got saved, and these 2 other blokes went down with the plane. They just accepted. One would say, I don't want to bail out, and the other would say, well, I'll stay with you. And that's how they got close together in a crew. When one was dying, the other one would sort of be with him. And another one, I had another chap, a young English wireless operator, he was sergeant, and he came to me and spoke to me about his crew. He'd had this crew and trained with them. When he went on the squadron, they took him out of the crew and then put another bloke in the crew. And he was very disappointed about this. And I said to him, well, I'd fight that one, you know. You've got to keep going there, keep fighting, you'll get back in the crew. And what happened was about a week later, that crew went off and got the chop without this bloke in. So his life was saved by him being taken out of that plane. Another bloke, a young Australian, he was a sergeant or flight sergeant air gunner, and he came to me and he was really in sad mood. His crew had been killed, and what he was disappointed, he hadn't been with them when they died. And you know, that was the sort of mental attitude. I didn't have that attitude. I sort of liked living a bit more than that. And, but that was true. There were stories like that. We had Paddy Owen in my hut, and Paddy Owen had over his bed, he was from Dublin, and over his bed he had a picture of De Valera, the Irish president, and there was a big one about that deep. And there was this picture of De Valera there, and so what somebody did, they went and carved out a cardboard chopper, thick cardboard, with red ink on the blade, and then they put a bit of string on it, and it was tied to the foot of Paddy Owen's bed, and the foot of the bed was in the centre of the hut, where you had the aisle going through beds on either side. And Paddy Owen was, he did this, and you know, nobody worried about it. That was his. He just accepted it. People say you're going to get the chop, but he just had a laugh about it. And that's what you did. You just had to accept what was happening to you and hope that you're going to be all right. And so after I finished my flying, I went back to my squadron after the war, and I visited to see people there, and the intelligence officer was there with a 44-gallon drum, burning all the secret documents, raid reports, bombing photographs, everything there. And he said to me, take whatever you want. He recognised me, and I didn't. I grabbed a few bits and pieces, but I was there to see some of the people there, and I was too dopey to realise if I got all these documents, I got a certain amount of stuff and raid reports where we've been hit by bombs and things like that. And what happened was that he was, and he offered me a trip to Germany. They were going to have on these flights to Germany, sightseeing, which you didn't see when you're on race. You saw nothing of what down below, and that was it. And this, he offered me this. This chap, this intelligence officer, said, there's a flight on to Germany this afternoon to go and sightsee, and he said, there's a seat on that plane for you. And I said, no, thank you. I was that happy I'd finished flying with Lancasters. I wasn't going to take the chance there. I'd become a scaredy, you see, a bit frightened. And I can say, we finished our tour and got through safely, and I've been back to England about 6 times, I think it is now, to see my crew. None of the bombs ever got here because they're frightened of getting lost and wouldn't find their way back again. And I told my rear gunner, not my rear gunner, my bomber, my brother was over there about the lion park out at Yanchep, and with the lion park you could drive through in your cars and look at the lions and all that sort of thing. And I said they had a sign up about all pomps on push bikes admitted free, you see. and I told the story was that the lion attacked the pom off the push bike, and he spat out the pom and ate the bike instead. and Miles said, is that what they think about us poms in Australia? Thank you. I did 30 for the tour, and then I did these other trips over the coastline and dropping the leaflets and that, where you could get shot down and killed anyway. But they didn't count as part of your tour. Your tour was 30 trips over into Germany, and there was dropping bombs was the factor there. I can say too, when we were being briefed for raids, we were never told we were bombing people. It was always you were bombing a certain target where there was oil or gas or railway marshalling yards, all these sort of munitions factories. You knew that people could get hit, but it sort of took a lot of the moral worry away from you in that regard by accepting the fact that you had to do it. And the thing was that we considered that what we were doing was important to free other countries. The Germans didn't mind bombing England and so on, and they were killing a lot of people in concentration camps, and life was pretty tough for people over there, I realised that. But the only way the war would be stopped, I think the Germans had something like about 1 million people involved with looking on the ground cover or the anti-aircraft in the planes, because we went to so many places that they couldn't ship their guns around everywhere. They had to have the emplacements there and the crews there looking after them. And that stuffed up their system quite a bit, that was for sure. So, you know, I just don't have any compunction. I've been told by people that since I've come back, you know, you're killing the poor Germans and things like that. Well, they were the ones that set it up. They started it all, wasn't me. Just as a matter of interest, the Australian Bomber Command crews were 2% of the Australian forces, yet they had over 20% of the casualties. 460 Squadron, and that was an Australian squadron, and the casualties there. 20% could get through a tour of ops. That was about right, and then you'd have the people killed, injured, and all that sort of thing. It was pretty tough to get through, and I know, as I say, my crew were lucky. We were just in the right spot at the right time, every time, whatever was going wrong. But it was frightening, and I suffered from stress from it, which made me give up working in the 80s when I was dealing with unions.